everyone. I want to talk about something important today, because it's time to get back to our roots around free expression on Facebook and Instagram.
Oh, is that what you wanted to talk about? Because, honestly, I'd much rather discuss why you suddenly look like Eddie Redmayne was cast to play Ice Cube. You look like White Macklemore. You look like a high schooler going undercover as a different high schooler with fewer friends. But I'm sorry, you were talking about getting back to your roots.
First, we're going to get rid of fact-checkers and replace them with community notes, similar to X, starting in the US. Second, we're going to simplify our content policies and get rid of a bunch of restrictions on topics like immigration and gender that are just out of touch with mainstream discourse. Third, we're changing how we enforce our policies to reduce the mistakes that account for the vast majority of censorship on our platforms. We used to have filters that scanned for any policy violation. Now, we're going to focus those filters on tackling illegal and high-severity violations. And for lower-severity violations, we're going to rely on someone reporting an issue before we take action.
Yeah, that is the CEO of Meta announcing that he's getting rid of fact-checkers and saying that he doesn't want to be out of touch with mainstream discourse while wearing a $900,000 watch. And there is just no way any watch is worth that much unless when you look at it, it reads, "It's time to donate the rest of your money. You officially seem to have too much." The changes Zuckerberg's making are striking. A leaked training document found it's now acceptable to say immigrants are grubby, filthy pieces of shit, and also specifies that this slur for trans people is no longer a designated slur and is therefore allowed. As for replacing fact-checkers with community notes like on X, it is worth noting that hasn't been a raging success over there, with one study finding nearly 3/4 of accurate community notes on election misinformation never got shown to users. Remember that tweet falsely claiming Haitians were eating pets in Springfield, Ohio? That claim was rated PolitiFact's lie of the year, but there is still no community notes on the tweet, despite multiple attempts to add one. And all of this is a pretty notable shift for Zuckerberg, because 7 years ago, amid widespread public outcry around Facebook stoking misinformation and hatred, he went before Congress to apologise.
For most of our existence, we focused on all of the good that connecting people can do. But it's clear now that we didn't do enough to prevent these tools from being used for harm as well. And that goes for fake news, for foreign interference in elections, and hate speech, as well as developers and data privacy. We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility, and that was a big mistake. And it was my mistake, and I'm sorry.
Yeah, it seems that Victorian ghost has made a pretty big turnaround since then, both in terms of what he's saying and how he looks. And I will admit, new Zuck does look like he's having more fun. He's tan, he looks like he's shopping at stores that only take crypto, and he's not sitting in front of Congress looking like a depressed version of the guy from the Stonks meme. Zuckerberg is framing all of this as merely responding to a broader cultural shift, something that he outlined naturally on Joe Rogan.
What we do is we try to build a platform that gives people a voice, but I think that there's this wholesale generational shift in who are the people who are being listened to. I think it's just like a wholesale shift in saying we just want different people who we actually trust,
right?
Who are actually going to like tell us the truth and not give us like the bullshit opinions that you're supposed to say, but like the type of stuff that I would actually like when I'm sitting in my living room with my friends, like the stuff that we know is true.
Is there anything more off-putting than a guy worth hundreds of billions trying to be a relatable everyman? You know how it is, chilling in the living room with the bros, cracking a six-pack of Ace of Spades Magnums, kicking back on your diamond-encrusted sofa and turning on the big screen TV, which in my house is a hollow box where I pay the cast of The Office to reenact my favourite scenes. You know, just relatable, everyday stuff, guys. And look, I'm not saying Facebook was doing a perfect job of moderating content until now. We've criticised them multiple times before on this show. I'm also not saying they even could have done it perfectly. It's been said that content moderation at scale is impossible to do well. But the decision to both abandon fact-checkers and turn off systems they previously claimed made the platform safer does feel like it's about to make that site a whole lot worse. And the self-depiction of Zuckerberg, rap name Little Broccoli, as someone simply embracing his company's roots around free expression is just self-serving bullshit. So, given all of that, tonight, let's take a look at the challenges of content moderation, how Facebook's faced them in the past, and what might have led to its new approach. And let's start with the challenges, because from the very beginning of the modern internet, there were concerns about what was on it.
In 1995, Senator James Exon brought a blue binder to the floor of the Senate. It was full of, well,
the most hardcore, perverse types of pornography.
The images came from the internet. Exon wanted his fellow senators to realize what kids could see.
Come by my desk and take a look at this disgusting Cheerio.
Okay, so There's a lot to love there, from the binder that says warning in big letters to the invitation to come by his desk any time for some disgusting material. But my favourite part has to be the clip of a Playboy JPEG loading 1 centimetre at a time. That is an extremely accurate portrayal of what online porn was like in the 90s. How do I know? No reason at all. Back then, there were battles in both Congress and the courts about how the law should treat websites hosting of things like pornography and defamatory comments. For a brief time, there were questions about whether a site's decision to moderate content in any way made it a publisher and therefore liable for anything that it didn't remove. That ultimately led to the passage of what's known as Section 230, often described as the 26 words that created the internet. It stated that companies could be shielded from liability for what its users post because, unlike, say, a print publication, websites are dealing with so much material they couldn't possibly vet all of it. It does have some carve-outs. It doesn't give sites a pass for certain types of illegal content like child sexual abuse and terrorism materials, but mostly it allows them to moderate without fear, which is good. Because, as scholars will tell you, content moderation is absolutely key to making the internet bearable.
You can't have a usable platform if you don't do some sort of content moderation. Otherwise, every platform will just be porn and diet pills.
Right. That would be a problem, especially on a website like, say, LinkedIn, although, to be honest, it might already be just porn and diet pills. I haven't been on it in years, as I've had this job since 2014 and, frankly, have no interest in learning how other people rise and grind. The point is, though, if you want people to use your site and, crucially, have companies want to pay to advertise on it, you're going to have to make choices about what to remove, and how you make those choices is always going to be contentious. Facebook over the years has learned a lot of these lessons the hard way. In its early days, it took an almost touchingly naive approach, as this former employee explains.
We had to set up some ground rules. Basic decency, no nudity and no violent or hateful speech. And after that, we felt some reluctance to interpose our value system on this worldwide community that was growing.
Was there not a concern then that it could become sort of a place of just utter confusion? That you have lies that are given the same weight as truths, and that it kind of just becomes a place where truth becomes completely obfuscated?
No. We relied on what we thought were the public's common sense and common decency to police the site.
Oh, you did you? I mean, I'd say that was adorable, but frankly, I would be embarrassed to go on Frontline and confess that everyone working at Facebook shared a level of wide-eyed naivete that can only be described as full-blown Amelia Bedelia. Now, obviously, that initial optimism didn't last, and over the years, Facebook started implementing more and more rules and employing more and more people to enforce them, and that could be a grim job. Here is one moderator describing what it was like to screen thousands of disturbing images a day with, I'm going to warn you, a very distracting disguise.
I think it would be easier to deal with the images if you weren't having to think about them so deeply. I worked the evening shift, so I would start at 6 p.m, finish at 2 o'clock in the morning. But then you would often wake up 3-4 hours later, you'd suddenly sit up in bed, remembering a decision that you've made and realizing that you've made a mistake. Like, I've missed a nipple. You remember some image that you'd seen and you suddenly realize that there was a naked girl on one side or an ISIS flag in the background. So now it should have been deleted under the terrorism policy.
Now, setting aside that it's coming from a grown man with a baby head talking like Darth Vader while dressed for vacation, that is a depressing glimpse into what Facebook was dealing with. And it is a long way from relying on the inherent good of humanity to hiring people to mainline ISIS porn. And while some decisions around blocking content were easy, others turned out to be more difficult. Because think about it. Say you ban nudity. What about statues? What about breastfeeding? What about a breastfeeding statue? And before you answer, what if I told you that I meant this one? See, it gets tricky quick. The company also had to develop policies around hate speech and misinformation, where the boundaries could be even trickier to define. For instance, their rules prohibited attacks on people because they belonged to protected categories based on things like race, sex, gender identity, or religious affiliation. But it allowed users broader latitude when they wrote about narrower subsets of those categories. And watching moderators try to apply rules like that in practice can be bizarre, as this hidden camera footage from a content moderation centre in Ireland shows.
That took their fuck off back to your country, and it says Muslim, immigrants.
Muslim immigrants.
If it just said Muslims, then yeah, you'd take this action, but it doesn't say that actually immigrants.
Is that right?
Yeah, because saying that their thinking might be physical inferiority.
Okay.
If it said, like, Muslim immigrants come, for example, that would be deleted.
Yeah, that is a weird place to draw the line, but at the same time, anywhere you draw a line can be weird. Deciding where speech becomes harmful is like trying to figure out which of the horrifying nightmares on an Animorphs cover you wouldn't run over with your car. These freaks, no question, it's on sight. I'll bounce them off the front bumper of my Subaru going 80 and feel nothing. On the other end, though, whoa, that's a normal kid. Slow down, I'm not trying to do time. But in the middle, yeah, that's a question, isn't it? That's a question. And the thing is, the same goes with fact-checking. Obvious lies are one thing, but there are plenty of statements that are factually true but still technically misleading. And at one time, Facebook put a lot of thought into this, even producing this video in 2018 featuring a bunch of employees wrestling with the nuances of moderation, and one even diagramming out the problem as he saw it.
Imagine on the x-axis that you have the amount of truth in a piece of content. Now on the y-axis, you have the intent to mislead. You can take this chart and you can split it into 4 quadrants, right? And the bottom left, you have the set of things that are low truth, but nobody was intending to mislead anything. That's just called being wrong on the internet, and it happens. And in the bottom right, it's the set of things that have high truth, but again, nobody was trying to mislead anyone. That's just called being right on the internet, and I'm sure it'll happen someday. The top right, this is things that are high truth, high intent to mislead. So this is stuff like propaganda. This is stuff like cherry picking of statistics. Now, mind you, we have to be really careful here, right? Because of our commitment to free speech, everything we do here has to be incredibly, incredibly careful. But then we move to this quadrant. This is like the really dangerous quadrant, right? Low amount of truth, high intent to mislead. These are things that were explicitly designed and architected to be viral. These are the hoaxes of the world. These are things like Pizzagate. This is just false news. We have to get this right if we're going to regain people's trust.
You know, it is amazing that all of this started when a young man had a simple dream of ranking his classmates by fuckability, and 15 years later, a company struggling to stop people from accusing random pizzerias of human trafficking. A butterfly masturbates in its dorm room, and it causes a hurricane for the rest of us. And to give that man credit, he is genuinely wrestling with the issue there, but the company wasn't doing that out of the goodness of its heart. Facebook had come under heavy fire for allowing fake news and hate speech to proliferate, not just in the US, but also abroad. We've talked before about how misinformation on Facebook helped fuel ethnic hatred, leading to headlines like, Facebook admits it was used to incite violence in Myanmar. It was around this time that Zuckerberg apologised to Congress, and the company began deploying an array of options to handle misinformation, from partnering with outside fact-checkers to appending notes to posts. It would also delete some posts or limit the reach of others, and in doing so, it found itself constantly making very hard decisions under pressure from some very powerful people. Here is one such case, and a former Facebook employee explaining the decision they ended up making.
We want to give this president the opportunity to do something historic.
This was the video of then House Speaker Pelosi, posted to Facebook in 2019, slowed down to make it seem that she was slurring her words.
Did it come down?
It did not.
Why?
Because it didn't violate the policies that they had.
So did she put pressure on the company to take it down?
She was definitely not pleased. She definitely wanted the company, yes. And it really damaged the relationship that the company had with her.
OK, set aside the fact that I don't see why you need to slow down footage to embarrass Nancy Pelosi, a person who says plenty of embarrassing things at normal speed. I do kind of agree with Facebook there that does this piss off Nancy Pelosi isn't a valid metric for taking that particular video down. And look, I'm not saying Facebook made the right decision 100% of the time. Again, no company operating at this scale could. But it did develop systems that it claimed worked pretty well at one point. They bragged that when people saw fact-checkers had labelled content false or partially false, they would not click on it nearly 95% of the time. And in a recent report, they noted that when it comes to hate speech they take an action against, their systems automatically dealt with 95.3% of it, meaning users only had to report the rest. Now, of course, some of those tools are being watered down and others are being turned off completely. And that brings us to the question of why? Why are they suddenly doing this? Well, there are a few things that happened during the past 5 years that have helped bring us to this point. One has been Conservatives repeatedly painting normal content moderation as political persecution.
Big tech's out to get conservatives. That's not a suspicion, that's not a hunch, that's a fact.
We've seen the big tech has been censoring us.
The American people are being censored. Conservatives are being censored. The information that's flowing to the American people is being censored. It's just the bottom line.
OK, that is obviously all bullshit, but to be fair, Devin Nunes knows a thing or two about censorship, given he once filed a $250 million lawsuit against Twitter accounts that made fun of him, including one that pretended to be Nunes's cow. He sued a fake Twitter cow because it said mean things about him, prompting the ACLU to issue this actual statement headlined, Devon Nunes's cow has a First Amendment right to call Representative Nunes a treasonous cowpoke. We truly live in the single stupidest timeline. The point is, Conservatives have been crying censorship for years, but the evidence for that is very weak. First, to the extent their posts do get flagged more, that's probably because Conservatives tend to be more likely to spread political misinformation according to numerous empirical studies. But even if you think platforms are trying to suppress Conservatives, they're doing a terrible job of that, given many of Facebook's top performers lean right, and there are 3 times as many explicitly conservative news influencers as liberal ones on the site. Nevertheless, Republicans have conducted an all-out assault on the idea of content moderation, often citing one go-to example outlined here by Janine Pirro.
Who suppressed free speech in the 2020 election? Facebook, when they wouldn't allow people to communicate and the press to communicate on Hunter Biden's laptop.
Right. Hunter Biden's fucking laptop. A story that big tech successfully censored, which is why you've never heard about it. And I'm afraid it is worth taking a second to remind you of the details in this story, because while people's minds might immediately swing to Russian hoax or damning evidence of Biden corruption, the truth is it was neither. Very briefly, back in 2020, while Trump was president, social media sites got a warning from the FBI to look out for hack and leak operations before the election. Then, in October, the New York Post ran a story based on files from a laptop they claimed belonged to Hunter Biden, which had been given to them by Steve Bannon and Rudy Giuliani. Facebook and Twitter were wary of the story. Twitter briefly didn't allow people to post links to it, and Facebook allowed the story to be seen and shared, but limited the article's reach, only to remove that restriction soon after. Now, it eventually came out that files from the laptop were legit, but also that nothing on it revealed illegal or unethical behaviour by Joe Biden. So, was initially suppressing the laptop story a fuck-up by these companies? In hindsight, yeah. Was the story itself particularly revelatory or important? Not really. Did Facebook's actions prevent people from finding out about it before the election? Again, not really. Even during the period Facebook was limiting its spread, the story got 54 million views on its site. So if this was an attempt at censorship, it was successful in limiting the audience to around the same number of people that watched the fucking Friends finale. But that initial decision meant Mark Zuckerberg got yelled at a lot by the right. And around that same time, he was also being yelled at by Biden's White House because as the COVID vaccine was rolling out, a lot of misinformation was circulating on Facebook. Biden himself said at one point of Facebook that they're killing people. And while he quickly walked that back to hear Zuckerberg tell it, the pressure from the White House to suppress anything critical of vaccines back then was overwhelming.
I mean, basically, these people from the Biden administration would call up our team and scream at them and curse. I mean, Biden, when he gave some statement at some point, I don't know if it was a press conference or to some journalists, where he basically was like, these guys are killing people. And I don't know, then all these different agencies and branches of government basically just started investigating, coming after our company. It was brutal. It was brutal.
OK, he's clearly pandering to Joe Rogan and his audience there, although many seem too distracted by his outfit for that to work well, given comments under that video include, bro dressed like undercover cop. I thought this was Lil Dicky, and why is a 40-year-old billionaire dressed like my 25-year-old shrooms guy? But let's deal with his implicit claim that the government launched investigations to punish Facebook for hosting anti-vaccine content. It is true that the government's investigated Facebook a lot in recent years, but none of those investigations fit Zuckerberg's narrative. Some, like an FTC antitrust lawsuit, were launched during the first Trump administration. Others, like the CFPB's investigation of big tech payment systems, involve multiple other companies. And much of the scrutiny the companies received in recent years was actually the result of a whistleblower releasing a cache of documents known as the Facebook files. As for his complaint the government was cursing and screaming at Facebook, they are allowed to do that. When we call up government agencies to check a fact, they can tell us to eat shit, because cursing does not violate your rights. For more on that, check out the Constitution for total fucking dumbasses. What they can't do is force you to do something. And in that interview, Zuckerberg describes his response to government demands back then as, I was just like, well, we're not going to do that. And exactly, you said no, as was your right. And don't take my word for this. Allegations like these have been adjudicated in court. When 2 Republican state AGs tried suing the government, claiming it had pressured platforms, including Facebook, to censor their speech, they lost in a 6-3 Supreme Court decision written by Amy Coney Barrett, who noted the plaintiffs could not demonstrate that their content was restricted due to government pressure. And look, I can understand Zuckerberg's feelings being hurt by the president saying his company's killing people. And I can understand him being sick of being yelled at by Republicans for doing too much and by Democrats for doing too little. On some level, I can even understand a business wanting to cozy up to whoever's in the White House. But there is one other factor here that does seem relevant to this discussion and feels important to mention.
It's a political evolution for Meta, 4 years after Facebook suspended Mr. Trump's account in the wake of January 6th, and just months after the president-elect accused Zuckerberg of plotting against him in 2020, calling for life in prison if Zuckerberg did it again. But after Mr. Trump's win, Zuckerberg traveled to Mar-a-Lago. His company donated $1 million to the Trump inaugural fund. And now close Trump ally and UFC head Dana White is joining Meta's board.
Meta, Facebook, I think they've come a long way.
Do you think he's directly responding to the threats that you have made to him in the past with prohibitions?
Yeah, probably. Trump threatened Mark Zuckerberg with life in prison. Then Zuckerberg turned around, gave him money, hired one of his buddies and changed the direction his company was going. It doesn't take a genius to draw a conclusion there. And in fact, it didn't take one. And it didn't stop there. Meta also recently paid $25 million to settle a bullshit lawsuit that Trump filed over being kicked off Facebook, despite many experts agreeing that was well within the company's rights. And at this point, it does begin to feel like Trump is doing exactly what Zuckerberg accused the Biden administration of, leveraging the power of his office to pressure social media companies to bend to his will. And Zuckerberg seems to be complying. And he'll insist these changes are not a result of being under political pressure. But either way, Facebook sure seems now set to become an absolute sewer of hatred and misinformation, which I know sounds like a pretty good description of Facebook already, but we're about to see what happens when they really stop trying. So what can we do? Well, there are some bad ideas out there. Both Democrats and Republicans have in recent years suggested ways to amend Section 230 so companies are more liable for what appears on websites, but I am yet to see a proposal that couldn't be easily weaponized to enable political censorship. There are definitely options available to companies that advertise on Facebook, and I would argue they might want to seriously consider whether they want their ads next to these actual sample sentences Facebook says are now acceptable. Hey, Disney, you want Olaf promoting Frozen 3 next to that shit? I don't know. Maybe you do. But for individuals, the options here are more limited. You could delete your Meta accounts, and you would not be alone in doing that. In January, Google searches for how to cancel and delete Facebook, Instagram, and Threads accounts increased by over 5,000%. And there are alternatives out there that don't seem as desperate to fall in line with Trump. But I do get that if Facebook and Instagram are where your family and friends are, you may not be ready to take that step. Just remember to take whatever you read on those platforms with even more of a grain of salt than you did before. But there is one small way you can actually fuck with Meta, and that is by making yourselves a bit less valuable to them. Remember, advertising makes up 98% of Meta's revenue, and a key component is them being able to offer companies the ability to micro-target you. Meta can do that because they track massive amounts of data about not just what you do on their sites, but all across the internet, which is why they probably would not want me to tell you that you can change your settings so that Facebook and Instagram cannot profit as much from your data anymore. If you'd be interested in a step-by-step guide on how to do that, simply visit johnoliverwantsyourerotica.com. And in the meantime, if Facebook is going to continue to subject us to a steadily rising tide of slurs, hoaxes, and misinformation, the least it can do is tell us the actual truth in its messaging.